My name is Andrew Conlog, and I'm here with a brand new segment that we like to call Andrew Explains It All, where I take a topic that's of interest to me and hopefully to you, and I explain it, hopefully all of it. So you have some cool conversation starters for cocktail parties or your in-laws or things like that. And today, for our inaugural episode, I'm going to talk about something that's very near and dear to me, and hopefully for you as well. It's Tucson, the city, and its history. We know that Tucson is the old Pueblo, but just how old is it, and what has it been up to in all that time? What kind of fascinating things have been going on? Well, I'll tell you. You know, this whole kind of southwestern area was settled a while ago. It's been settled by people for a while. But Tucson itself as a community traces its roots back to the oldest contiguous inhabitants of this area, which are the Tohono O'odham, which is a Native American tribe. Tohono O'odham, in their own language, that phrase means desert people, and that's what they are. And actually, it was a Tohono O'odham village that was really the start of Tucson as a gathering place, as a community. It was at the base of Sentinel Peak, or as we also call it, A Mountain, because of the big U of A on there. And that village, I'm going to do my best with this one, but no guarantees, is called, or was called, Tucson, something along those lines. And what that means in the Tohono O'odham language is at the base of a black mountain, which it was. It was at the base of Sentinel Peak, which was is like a dead volcano, basically. That's where Tucson gets its name, too. Just like me, I'm actually descended from Spanish settlers, so my ancestors could not pronounce that either. Hasn't improved in however many years, as you can see. And they came up with Tucson, or I don't know exactly how you would, the correct pronunciation in terms of the original pronunciation that the Spanish came up with. But then, of course, the Americans couldn't pronounce that, and that's why we have Tucson. And so on and so forth, maybe forever. So that was the kind of the beginning of Tucson. The next major group, cultural group that came in to settle the Tucson area was the Apaches. And now a lot of people that are cursorily familiar with the Apaches might be surprised by this, but the Apaches are actually relative latecomers. They came maybe around 1,000 years ago, roughly or so. And archaeologists think that they immigrated from Canada, from the northern Canada, Alaska type area, and came on down. They think that because the Apache and Navajo languages, the Apaches and Navajo are related, are real similar to languages up there, which is very interesting, at least I think so. And that's how they came to be here. And they were they and the Tohono O'odham were the two big groups in this area until, as I alluded to, the arrival of the Spaniards. A lot of people are familiar with one of the first Spanish settlers here, Father Kino. He was a missionary, and he founded San Javier del Bac, the mission church, out in the desert a little ways over there. But as with the Spanish modus operandi, and actually a lot of the European colonizing guys, after the missionaries came the soldiers. And the soldiers are actually more involved in the founding of Tucson as like a modern European conception of a municipality kind of thing. Make no mistake, the Tohono O'odham are responsible for this community, but from like a city-type perspective, we trace the actual founding of Tucson to the Spanish in 1775. It was founded by a guy, a Spanish military officer, named Hugo Oconor, as a presidio, as like a fort that was designed to protect the Spanish guys from the Native American guys, for good or for ill, for both those groups of people. Sharp-eared listeners will detect that the name Hugo Oconor sounds weird. That's because it is. That was not actually his birth name. His name was Hugh O'Connor. He was an Irish guy who was just kind of like a mercenary dude who moved his way up the ranks in the Spanish colonial military and became a big shot and was founding forts. And he founded the Presidio San Agustin del Tucson in 1775. And that was that for a bit, but then in the first sort of nation-state hand-changing that Tucson went through, it went through a lot. Tucson became part of Mexico after Mexico revolted from Spain. And then, not too long after that, another shakeup. most of Arizona became part of the United States of America in the Mexican-American War, and that was signed over in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. But actually not Tucson. After the Mexican-American War, Tucson was still part of Mexico. But then again, another shocking twist, not for long. Tucson and the area surrounding it, actually the little strip of land in Arizona below the Gila River, and then a tiny little bit of New Mexico over here, becomes part of America through what's called the Gadsden Purchase. It was just bought. It was exchanged for money. And that was originated by a fellow named James Gadsden, who did all the negotiating and things. And in 1854, Tucson becomes an American town. But then again, not for long, because Tucson and this little area actually becomes part of the Confederate States of America. That's right, this used to be part of the CSA, the Rebs. We were rebel people. And what happened there was that the Confederates come from the state of Texas. Texas was a Confederate state, and they kind of swoop in right at the beginning of the Civil War and take over actually like the bottom part of New Mexico and the bottom part of Arizona. The whole territory up until then had been a big territory of New Mexico. Both Arizona and modern New Mexico were one big territory. They kind of claimed the bottom half of that as the Confederate territory of Arizona. And they captured Tucson, actually without a shot being fired, because a lot of the local Tucson guys were big rebel folks, which I guess is neither here nor there at this point. But then one final time, Tucson changes hands in terms of nationality, and the Union reconquers it. And the way they do that is there's this big group of Union soldiers coming from California called the California Column that march out of there, and their goal is to march through this new Confederate territory of Arizona and take it over, and then maybe even fight the rebels in Texas. So that's exactly what they do. They march largely unopposed. There's a tiny little battle where like 3 or 4 people get killed up by Picacho Peak, if you ever heard of that. That's what that was. And then basically after that, the Confederates in Tucson were like, well, can't do this anymore. They're coming. So they all fled. And Tucson was then recaptured by the Union, again, without a shot being fired. So not a lot of action, but the Tucson area does play a pretty, I guess, important part in the Civil War. And then finally, for sort of the epilogue of all this early Tucson history, in 1863, after it was reconquered, Abraham Lincoln proclaimed for the first time in history as a political unit the territory of Arizona, where he split Arizona and New Mexico down the middle like it is now, and Arizona became its own territory. And for a while, our own old Pueblo was even the territorial capital. Not anymore, but for a while anyway. Well, that is my explanation of all of the early history of Tucson. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.